what's in the box with my bore gauge. In previous videos you'll have seen that I was thrilled when I actually discovered I had Yoshimura 812 Pistons. I already knew there was something a bit suspicious because when I'd used the vernier to measure the bore, I could see that it was much bigger than a standard CB750. So finding these was a surprise, but I knew there was something going on. At the end of that episode, and there'll be a link somewhere, probably in the description, you'd see that having used the vernier, I wasn't sure that these pistons could be used with these barrels. And before I went much further, I needed to know. So what I've done is I've bought bore gauge and I've bought a set of micrometers. They're commonly available on leading retail platforms. I will put a link in the description. And I've fiddled over the last week or so using these and getting used to how to use them so that I could make decisions with my barrels. I thought this would be a useful video to show you how to use the bore gauge, or how I've used it anyway. How I've used it with the micrometer, because obviously it's an important partnership really that you need to use. And at the end of the video I'll tell you what I have actually found out about my barrels and my pistons and the decision this equipment helped me to make. What's in the box with my bore gauge? The most important part is obviously the dial gauge. It has a scale that's in 0.01 of a millimetre. Each one of the little increments is 0.01. It has a smaller dial, and what that records is sometimes the needle will go more than one time round when you're measuring. Let me just show you that. And that smaller dial counts them up. Now, to be honest, you want to try to keep it in the first range, but obviously that can't always happen. Important thing to remember is when you're measuring something, that way is it's actually getting smaller, and that way it's actually getting bigger. It seems counterintuitive and can catch you out, but it is important to remember that when you're actually using it. I'll mention it when I get onto the bore actually measurements themselves. The actual rod for measuring with has the dial gauge on the top. The important bit with this is it has two wheels that actually go across to the side of whatever you're measuring, and in the middle here is a little sort of dimple, and that's the thing that actually does the measuring for you. So whenever you're setting it up, obviously that's got to be touching, but you'd use those wheels in the cylinder so that you keep it nice and even. And in here, I believe these are called Anvils, and they have lots of different sizes. This goes up to, I think, 160mm. You need to find an anvil that you can screw into here that'll give you so that both points are touching so that you can measure them. Now, to stop this wiggling about, it has a lock. So the first thing I need to do is, for my bores, decide which anvil to use. First of all, I've just done it by eye to see what one I think would go in. So quite literally I'm going to screw this in, and obviously you don't want to cause any damage, so you want to go further than you think at first. And then I can try it in the bore. Now that's still too far out, I think, so let's go a bit further. Alright. Now remember, I have to push those little wheels back. Oh, that'll go in lovely now. And I can see that the little point at the end will also touch. Yeah. So I'll tighten that. And just check it again. That seems okay. So now I need to fit the actual dial gauge onto it. Now, this in the middle is connected to the mechanism, so you can make sure it's pressed down or you can position it where you want. Some of them have a little lock screw as well. With this one, it's got like an interference fit on the actual dial. And if I hold that, I can feel it against the actual thing, the actual bit inside that sends the measurement through. Now, I want to be able to measure bigger and smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in so that I've moved it round about halfway. So I pressed it down so this came up slightly and I've moved it halfway. And I'll tighten this clamp, and the only thing with this clamp is make sure it's not somewhere that's going to get in your way. Right, now you may be thinking, why has he not zeroed it? Well, this dial actually moves around so you can zero it. But at this point it doesn't really matter, because I've not set anything up at all. I've just put the gauge together in a way that this will measure bigger and smaller. So let me just show you very quickly how that would work with the bore. So let me show you how this works. This goes into the bore and you use these two wheels to balance it, and you need to squeeze it in so that the actual measuring mechanism touches the wall. And then when you position it down, as you can see, if I move it around, when it's not horizontal, it gets bigger, so it gives you a bigger measurement. So the thing you're looking for, and in this case I'm going to go about 30 mil down, about half the stroke, and I know I'm not on the thrust axis, I'm on the sort of the opposite axis, and if I move this up and down like that, so you see the needle moving. Well, the furthest that way it goes is the biggest it'll be. So I'm looking for this deflection, what the highest part is. And I can see it's coming to about here. So what I'll do is I'll move the zero, and I'll try and put the zero so that maximum deflection just touches it. I think I've got it about there. And it doesn't take much rocking, but so remember, this way it would be smaller, this way and it would be bigger. But as it stands, when these are squeezed in and it says 0, that is the size of the bore at that point. Having set this to this bore so that I can say that is the size, I can use this to compare. Now if you look, this bore is the same size as this one. And so is this. And I'll be honest, this actually got me quite excited at first when I discovered it. So all these bores in that direction at 30 mil are the same size. But what size? That's the next thing that I need to work out. And although you can do it with a vernier, I found it much easier to do with a micrometer. So let me tell you a little bit about the micrometers now. Now I bought a set of micrometers that take me from I think 25 mil up to I think 100. The one that I need to use is this one, and it's the one that measures between 50 and 75. The measurement on micrometers is on this barrel and this rotating sort of sleeve. Each one of the increments at the top is 1 millimeter, and the half millimeters are actually signified with the ones at the bottom. So when you measure something and it comes down to it, say it was 60 mil, when that is on 0 and it's against the 60 mil, that would be an exact measurement. Every increment up of that would be 0.1 of a mil bigger or 0.1 of a mil smaller. And to make sure you don't really squeeze it up, and I've seen these used as clamps, it has a ratchet at the end, and you tighten down until the ratchet goes, and that is the maximum pressure for measuring. Different temperatures, different places mean that things expand, contract, measurements vary. So what you need to do with your equipment before you use it, before your micrometer, is you need to set it to a standard size, and it gives you a 75, a 50 and a 25 in this kit. So this is a 75 mil end to end. You need to make sure they're clean. So I can check that this micrometer actually measures to 75 and it zeroes out at that before I start. And you should check them every time you're going to use them. So I've opened up the micrometer to beyond 75 and I'm going to put it in a vise. It's not necessarily 100% you need to use a vise, but it saves me having to have 3 hands. And make sure everything is clean. Wipe over with a bit of brake cleaner or something, but you want them clean, no little bits in the way. Position this nice and level in here. And you've got to make sure you're getting it nice and square, because sometimes it can be a little bit off. Now I'm not sure if you can see, but the line here now should be against the 0. Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that. It's to 0, so that these are set right. If they weren't, you use a little spanner to just move this collar around and then recheck them. So you can recalibrate them. I mean, frequently they will stay right. What did the bore measure to when I set the bore gauge in the bore and I got it to 0? I can use the micrometer to do that. Position the 2 measuring points inside, and this is fiddly. Now I'm not using the ratchet because the spring on this is a little bit too strong, but if I wind it in, and if you watch the needle, I'll get the needle to 0. Now I'm looking for the maximum deflection, because if it does go any bigger it would mean I need to adjust the micrometer again. It's slightly bigger there. Bit of fiddling around and you'll find you can get there. So that micrometer now is set so that those are the same width, to put that at 0, as they were in the bore. So this measurement should tell me how big my bores are. Reading off this, I get to the 64 mil, and then following it on, it looks like these bores measured with that is 64.5 millimeters exactly. Now that gives you quite a good measurement, but I don't feel it's quite as accurate as it could be. So that's one way of setting the bore gauge in the bore and then finding a measurement. Now if you did that for every single one, that would be really painful. So the better technique for doing this is to set the bore gauge to what the measurement should be and set this so it's zeroed at that. Use the bore gauge in the bores and see how much deflection there is to give you the actual measurements. So I'm going to set this now so that it's 64.5 exactly on the micrometer. I put the clamp on. By doing it this way, you can move this about a lot more to make sure you are getting the maximum deflection. And looks like I may have been a little bit out before. I want it just so that the very maximum that ever gets to is on the 0. There it is. Yeah. Right, and I can't get it any further than that, no. So remember, everything that way would be smaller and everything this way would be bigger. I've set the bore gauge and I want to check these barrels halfway down the stroke on the thrust axis. What I mean by the thrust axis is the pistons in the bore like that, so the conrods are pushing it this way and that. Those sides are the ones that will get the most wear, so that should be the biggest. So I've numbered each of the barrels. It's very easy to lose track of where you are, and I've just quickly note down. So this is set to 64.5, and when I put it in, I'm looking for the maximum deflection on cylinder 4. I have got a maximum deflection where it gets to 0.06 of a mil, 6 increments there. Now remember, coming this way means bigger, so that actually means it's 64.56. 64.56. The maximum deflection on this one takes it to about 0.8, so that's 64.58. This one I think is also 8, 64.58. And this one, ooh, that's about 0.6, so that's 64.56. Now I'll do that and reset the bore gauge 2 or 3 times before I'll settle 100% on the figures. But what it's telling me at the moment is that 64.5 being the reference, that one's 0.06 bigger, that one's 0.08 bigger, that one's 0.08 bigger, and that one's 0.06 bigger. So I am confident I've got the measurement of the bores. The next thing to do is to actually measure the pistons. Now I've numbered the bores and I've also numbered the pistons. So I've got number 3, number 2, number 1. So what I'll do now is I'll use the micrometer to measure the pistons. Now this is a little fiddly because you're measuring something that's round with something that's flat, so you have to have a few goes at it. The other thing is there's a lot of varying information. If the manufacturer tells you where to measure, that's where you measure. If there's no manufacturing guide, some people say you measure completely at the bottom of the skirt, some people say you measure at the bottom of the pins, and there can be anything between 1 inch and 1 centimetre, you name it, there's a different measurement people will come out with. For these pistons, I decided I would measure about 1 centimetre up, so I've got the full skirt there, and I'm going to measure it across the thrust space. So, free off my micrometer, put it near to the range, try and get it so that it's at 90 degrees to the actual pins. About 1 centimetre. And I keep just fiddling till I get what I think is a reasonable measurement. And you can see the clicking. Now this one, has measured to 64.41. It's 64 along. It's not got to the half, it's less than the half. So the 4-1, it's 64.41. And that was piston number 1. Number 2. And 64.41 again. Having measured all of the pistons now, the news is not good. The clearances are far too big for me to use. It's a shame, but I did know there might be issues here. And one of the other things that I didn't mention earlier, I have actually given these barrels a hone to try to clean them up, and I have cleaned them up reasonably well. However, I think I had to take out more than I'd have liked. When I first measured them, and as I said I've been measuring them a few times, they actually were just at the top of the spec, about 0.06, 0.07, and the hone has taken out, or I've needed to take out more than I could get away with. So I can't use these pistons with these bores. Hang around now, because I'll show you how to check whether your bores are round and whether there's any taper as well. When checking a bore, besides the actual size, you really want to know whether it's actually round and whether there is any taper, whether it's narrower at the top and wider at the bottom or whatever. And the best way to do it is to measure the thrust face and the faces that are at 90 degrees. You can measure all over, but if you get those two, it gives you a really good indication. Now, this first measurement, taken again at around about the middle of the stroke, I'm getting, let me just, I'm getting 64.56, and measuring this way, I'm actually getting 64.57. So this is 0.02 out of 0.01, sorry, out of round. Now there will be a spec for that, and I'm pretty confident that would be within it. So they're reasonably round. Yeah, I've already thought that. The way to measure the taper is, and you could do this down the thrust face or down the other radial face. Probably best off doing the thrust face, but I'll do this one so that you can actually see what I'm getting. Right, so I'm on 64.57 across there. And again 64.57, and towards the bottom again 64.57. So I've taken 3 measurements and there isn't any taper. I measured them the other way as well, and there wasn't taper that way. They're actually quite well bored. It's a real crying shame that the clearance is just too big. It's possible they were machined to be too big in the first place, but hey, not to worry. I found using the bore gauge and the micrometers really useful. It can be a bit tricky with the bore gauge because the way that the needle deflects is the opposite to what you'd expect with the measurements to go. In that, going that way is getting bigger and going this way is getting smaller. It can confuse you. But I did find out these bores won't work with these pistons. I didn't initially buy this as a project bike. I was looking for parts for another bike. And I've now sucked into doing it. I really would like to use these pistons, but I'll need to either get new barrels or have sleeves pressed in. Now, I've approached a couple of companies to get prices for that. I'm not going to spend a fortune on this engine. I can get a set of standard barrels and standard pistons probably for a couple of £100 including the rings. I don't want to spend £1,000 on having sleeves and things done, so I need to think about that. I really would like to use them. Other interesting thing that's come up, they measure at 64.41. For them to be 64mm pistons, they should actually be 63.9 something. These are actually made as a 823cc, despite the 812. 64.5mm. Yoshimura did sell 823 as well. I'm a bit surprised though these pistons have 812 on here. I've spent a lot of time researching, a lot of time on forums, a lot of time on the internet, and I've found out loads, most of which has not been much use to me. These are cast pistons, and I think they're made in the same factory that Honda had their pistons made. The company's a company called Art. They're probably the company's CB750 pistons modified. And they would be cast oversize anyway, and obviously Yoshimura thought we can machine some of these up to be bigger. Not to worry, I've got that. The next issue was piston rings. Now, I did buy a set of 812 piston rings from America or from Canada, and unfortunately they are for 64mm pistons, so I'm going to try and sell them on. But I did find a source for 64.5mm piston rings for these pistons in the UK, and it's a company that actually bought up Yoshimura R&D, a big bulk of CB750 stuff from the 80s. So I'm going to get some genuine 823 Yoshimura piston rings. I've done that even though I don't know what I'm going to do with the barrels yet. If it turns out too expensive to do the barrels and I end up selling these on with a set of proper piston rings, they're far more attractive. So I saw it as a reasonable investment. It's been an interesting one, this. I hope that the information about the bore gauge and the micrometers is of use to some people. It's a real conundrum, this particular project, because it wasn't even a project I was taking on. I've spent all this time now. I'll put a video out of cleaning up the pistons, and when I get the piston rings, give you some more information on the barrels. But I really need to look at the rest of the engine. I did find some swarf in the head. I'm going to try and at least inspect part of the bottom, even if I don't strip the bottom completely. If I can't find swarf in any of the galleries, I'll probably be okay. But I'm going to do that next, before I start making any more spending plans on barrels. If you enjoyed this and it's been useful, why not give us a like? If you haven't been here before, give us a subscribe. But no matter, thanks for watching.